I am Franklin. History is written by the victors. By December 1989, the air in Panama City was so thick with tension, you could cut it with a machete. The Americans were coming. Everyone knew it. The only question was who would be left alive to clear their bank accounts. Ramon "Mono" Vasquez sat in a dimly lit bar in the Casco Viejo district. Outside, the tropical rain was pounding the cobblestones like a drum. In front of him sat a glass of cheap rum and a briefcase that felt like it weighed 1,000 tons. "You're late, Ramon," a voice rasped from the shadows of the corner booth. It was a woman known only as the Orchid. She worked for everyone and no one. She was the one who translated the whispers of the jungle into the language of Swiss bank accounts. "Traffic is difficult when there are tanks on the highway," Ramon replied, not taking his eyes off the door. "Is the boat ready in Colón?" "The boat is ready, but the price has changed. The CIA just put a $2 million bounty on that case. They're not calling it evidence anymore. They're calling it national security threat." Ramon gripped the handle tighter. "Inside this box is the reason the 82nd Airborne is about to jump. It's not about Noriega's drug running. It's about who gave him the planes to do it in 1984. Names, dates, and flight logs signed by men who now sit in the Oval Office." Suddenly, the jukebox died. The ceiling fan slowed to a crawl. The power was out. "Blackout," the Orchid whispered, her hand sliding toward her purse. It started. From the street came the low, rhythmic thrumming of heavy engines. Not cars, Humvees. And above the sound of the rain, the distinct chop, chop, chop of Black Hawk helicopters. The invasion, Operation Just Cause, had begun 2 hours ahead of schedule. "They're cuting off the city." Ramon stood up, grabbing the case. "If I don't get this to the embassy of the Vatican or the Swiss, this history gets rewritten by the winners, and we end up in a shallow grave in the rainforest." "Ramon," the Orchid called out as he reached the back door. "In this game, there are no winners. Only people who haven't been caught yet." Ramon stepped out into the rain. The sky was lit up by the eerie green glow of magnesium flares. The hunt for the Panama Paradox was on. When the 82nd Airborne drops into a city, they don't knock on the front door. They blow the roof off the house and call it liberation. By 1 a.m., Panama City was no longer a place of business. It was a dark, humid slaughterhouse. The sky was a bruised shade of purple, torn apart by the white-hot tracers of AC-130 gunships circling above like vengeful ghosts. Ramon "Mono" Vasquez pressed his back against the wet concrete of an alleyway in El Chorrillo. The smell was unforgettable, a mix of burning rubber, sewage, and the cloying sweet scent of overripe mangoes rotting in the heat. In his right hand, the aluminum briefcase felt like a block of dry ice, so cold it burned. He could hear the voice of God, the massive speakers mounted on American Humvees broadcasting psychological warfare tapes. They were playing hard rock, the distorted guitars of Van Halen screaming through the streets to disorient Noriega's troops. But for Ramon, it was just the soundtrack to his own execution. "Don't breathe, Mono," he whispered to himself. Across the street, a shadow detached itself from the ruins of a burned-out pharmacy. It didn't move like a soldier. It moved like a predator. No heavy gear, no clinking canteens. Just a sleek, matte black silhouette with a night vision monocle glowing like a demon's eye. Delta Force. These weren't the boys from the 82nd. These were the unit. The men who didn't exist, sent to clean up the messes that shouldn't have been made. The operator, a man Ramon would later know only as Operator Spectre, raised a suppressed MP5. The sound of the shots wasn't a bang. It was a series of dry, mechanical coughs. The 3 Dignity Battalion militiamen who had been chasing Ramon didn't even have time to raise their rusted AK-47s. They folded like laundry, their blood mixing with the rainwater in the gutter. Spectre didn't check the bodies. He turned his head slowly, the green glow of his NVG, night vision goggles, scanning the alley. He was looking for the briefcase. He was looking for Ramon. Ramon Vasquez. The operator's voice was low, filtered through a tactical throat mic. It sounded like gravel grinding in a blender. The White House wants that luggage back. You have 3 seconds to slide it across the pavement before I turn your head into a memory. Ramon didn't slide the case. He knew the math. As soon as that case moved, his life expectancy dropped to 0. "I know what's in here, Spectre," Ramon shouted, his voice cracking. "I've seen the photos of the '84 meeting in Costa Rica. I know who shook hands with the Medellin bosses. If I die, my contact in Mexico City releases the negatives to the New York Times in 6 hours." The operator paused. In the world of black ops, a threat is just another variable to be calculated. "Mexico City is currently being monitored by a different team, Ramon," Spectre said, stepping into the light of a burning car. His uniform was a patchwork of shadows, his face covered by a Nomex balaclava. "There are no negatives. There is only you and the box, and the clock is ticking." Suddenly the ground shook. A stray shell from a Panamanian artillery piece, or a misdirected American strike, hit the building next to them. The explosion showered the alley in glass and masonry. Ramon seized the moment. He didn't run away. He ran through the pharmacy ruins, deeper into the burning heart of El Chorrillo. "Contact! Target is moving north toward the Vatican Embassy," Spectre barked into his radio. Ramon scrambled over a collapsed wall, his lungs burning. He found himself in a narrow courtyard filled with laundry lines. The white sheets, soaked by the rain, hung like ghosts in the dark. He wove through them, the briefcase banging against his knees. Behind him, he heard the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of Spectre's boots. The Delta operator was fast, closing the gap with terrifying efficiency. Ramon dove into a basement crawl space, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He could hear the operator's footsteps above him, heavy and deliberate on the wooden floorboards. Creak. The sound of a floorboard directly above his head. A drop of cold sweat fell from Ramon's forehead and splashed onto the aluminum case. Spectre stopped. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant roar of a helicopter. "You're a good courier, Ramon," the operator said, his voice directly above. "But you're carrying the weight of a world that doesn't want to be saved. Give me the case, and I'll give you a head start to the border. That's the best deal you're going to get tonight." Ramon looked at the diplomatic seal on the briefcase. He remembered the face of the man in the photos, a high-ranking official who was currently on television talking about morality and the war on drugs. Ramon reached into his pocket and pulled out a small emergency flare he had swiped from a boat in Colon. "Hey, Spectre," Ramon yelled. "You want the luggage? Come and get it." He kicked the basement door open and fired the flare, not at the soldier, but at a stack of dry cleaning chemicals and moonshine crates in the corner of the room. Whoosh! The basement erupted in a blinding magnesium white light and blue chemical fire. The smoke was thick, acrid, and instantaneous. Spectre cursed as his night vision was washed out by the flare, the electronics in his goggles screaming at the sudden overload of light. He was blind for 3 vital seconds. Ramon didn't wait. He burst out of the side window, tumbled into the street, and started running toward the only place in Panama City where the Americans couldn't go without starting a world war. The Apostolic Nunciature, the Vatican's embassy, the same place General Noriega was heading. But as Ramon turned the corner, he saw something that made his blood freeze. It wasn't the Americans. Blocking the road was a black Mercedes-Benz with tinted windows. The door opened and a man stepped out. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He was wearing a white linen suit that stayed perfectly dry despite the rain. He held a gold-plated Browning high power. "Ramon, mi amigo," the man smiled, showing a row of perfect white teeth. It was Don Alejandro, the primary liaison for the Medellin Cartel in Panama. "The gringos want that book for their pride. I want it for my retirement, and I think I pay better than a bullet from a Delta boy." Ramon was trapped. Behind him, the silent professional was recovering. In front of him, the cartel was waiting, and the city was burning down around them all. In the history of bad ideas, standing between a Delta Force operator and a Medellin Cartel hitman is right at the top, somewhere between invading Russia in winter and poking a sleeping jaguar with a short stick. Ramon stood in the center of the rain-slicked intersection, the glowing embers of a destroyed bus casting long dancing shadows. To his left, the silent professional Spectre was emerging from the chemical smoke of the basement, his suppressed weapon held at a low ready, his movements as fluid as oil. To his right, Don Alejandro leaned against his Mercedes, the gold-plated Browning reflecting the emerald light of a hovering helicopter. "Ramon," Alejandro purred, his voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. "Don't be a martyr for a government that doesn't even recognize your citizenship. Give me the case, and you'll be on a plane to Rio before the sun comes up." "He's lying, Vasquez." Spectre's voice cut through the humidity, cold and mechanical. "The cartel doesn't retire witnesses. They recycle them into the soil. Drop the case and put your hands on your head. This is your final warning." Ramon looked at the case. Then he looked at the sky. A massive CH-47 Chinook heavy-lift helicopter was thundering overhead, its dual rotors kicking up a cyclonic wind that sent trash and debris flying through the air. "You want it?" Ramon screamed, his voice raw. "Come and get it from the church." Ramon didn't run toward either of them. He dove sideways through the shattered window of a colonial-era cafe. Rat-tat-tat-tat. The street erupted. Spectre and Alejandro's men opened fire simultaneously. The Mercedes windshield disintegrated into 1,000 diamonds. One of Alejandro's bodyguards was knocked backward, his chest riddled by the surgical precision of the Delta operator's MP5. Ramon scrambled through the cafe, sliding over a mahogany bar covered in broken glass. Behind him, the front wall of the building was being chewed to pieces by a hail of lead. "Spectre, we have multiple hostiles, engaging cartel elements," a voice barked over the tactical radio. Ramon could hear it even through the walls. The intersection had turned into a three-way war zone. The 82nd Airborne Humvees were turning the corner, their .50 caliber machine guns starting to bark, chewing up everything in their path, cartel, militia, and concrete alike. Ramon burst out of the cafe's kitchen and into a narrow service alley. He didn't look back. He ran toward the Avenida Balboa, his boots splashing through deep puddles that tasted of salt and oil. He could see it now. The Apostolic Nunciature, the Vatican Embassy, a white fortress of sanctuary guarded by stone walls and the invisible shield of international law. It was only 3 blocks away, but those 3 blocks were a gauntlet of fire. Suddenly, a black SUV roared out of a side street, tires screaming. It wasn't the Americans. It was the cartel. The vehicle swerved, trying to ram Ramon against a wall. He dived into a narrow gap between 2 buildings, a space so tight he had to turn sideways, dragging the briefcase behind him. The SUV slammed into the wall, the sound of crumpling metal echoing like a gunshot. Ramon kept moving. He climbed a rusted fire escape, his hands bleeding from the jagged metal. From the rooftop, he saw the nightmare. The district of El Chorrillo was a sea of flames, the little Hiroshima of Panama. A shadow fell over him. He looked up. A Delta Force MH-6 Little Bird helicopter was hovering just 20 feet above the roof, its skids almost touching the gravel. A sniper was leaned out of the door, his rifle pointed directly at Ramon's heart. "Nowhere to go, Mono," the sniper's voice came over a loudspeaker. "Drop it." Ramon looked at the embassy wall, just 50 yards away. Between him and the wall was a terrifying gap, a leap across a 15-foot alley to the next building's roof. He gripped the briefcase. He thought about the photos inside, the faces of the clean politicians who were currently sitting in air-conditioned offices in D.C., watching the invasion on CNN. "For the truth," Ramon whispered. He sprinted. The sniper fired. The bullet grazed Ramon's thigh, tearing through his trousers and drawing a line of fire across his skin. He didn't stop. He leaped. For a heartbeat, he was weightless, suspended between the burning city and the dark sky. The briefcase felt like wings. He slammed into the opposite roof, his ribs cracking against the parapet. He rolled, gasping for air, the copper taste of blood in his mouth. "Target is down, moving to intercept," the pilot shouted. Ramon didn't wait to be caught. He scrambled to his feet and threw the briefcase over the final wall, the wall of the Vatican Embassy. It vanished into the darkness of the courtyard. Seconds later, Ramon tumbled over the wall himself, landing hard on the manicured grass. Silence. The roar of the helicopters. The screams of the dying. The thud of the machine guns. It all seemed to fade behind the thick stone walls of the nunciature. He wasn't alone. Standing in the courtyard, surrounded by his terrified aides, was General Manuel Noriega, the Pineapple himself. He was wearing a sweat-stained military uniform, clutching a Mauser pistol, his face a mask of sweating paranoia. He looked at Ramon. Then he looked at the aluminum briefcase lying on the grass between them. "Is that the archive?" Noriega rasped, his eyes bulging. "Is that my insurance?" Ramon stood up slowly, clutching his side. He looked at the man who had ruled Panama with an iron fist, and then he looked at the briefcase that held the secrets of the people who had created him. "It's not your insurance, General," Ramon said, spitting blood onto the Vatican's grass. "It's the obituary for everyone in this game, including you." Outside the gates, the sound of American tanks grinding their way up the street began to vibrate through the ground. The silent professional specter was at the gate. The cartel was at the back wall, and the Pope's representative was about to open the door to a very long, very dark night. Sanctuary is a beautiful word until you realize it's just another name for a cage. The Apostolic Nunciature was supposed to be the safest place in Panama, but as the sun began to peek through the smoke of a burning city, it felt like a tomb made of white marble and broken promises. General Noriega stared at the briefcase on the grass. He looked like a man who had been told the exit door was painted on the wall. Behind the embassy gates, the Americans had arrived. They didn't storm the building. That would be a diplomatic nightmare. Instead, they brought the wall of sound. Massive speakers were being stacked like a wall of black bricks. They began to blast high-decibel rock music. "Welcome to the Jungle" by Guns N' Roses. A psychological assault designed to drive the general out. The windows of the Nunciature rattled in their frames. The ground vibrated. "The case, Vasquez," Noriega shouted over the music, his hand trembling on his pistol. "Open it. If I go to a U.S. prison, I'm taking every senator and director with me. Open it, or I'll kill you where you stand." Ramon looked at the general. He didn't see a dictator anymore. He saw a man who had outlived his usefulness to his masters. "You don't have the codes, General," Ramon said, stepping toward the case. "And you never did. You were just the delivery boy. Now you're the garbage they're waiting to pick up." Before Noriega could respond, the side door of the nunciature opened. A tall man in a black cassock, the papal nuncio, stepped out. Behind him, emerging from the shadows of the hallway, was Spectre. The Delta operator had removed his helmet. His face was weathered, his eyes the color of cold flint. He wasn't holding a gun. He was holding a piece of paper. "The church has granted me entry as a technical observer," Spectre said, his voice cutting through the roar of the music outside. "General, put the gun down. You're finished. The Vatican has already negotiated your surrender terms with Washington." Noriega looked at the nuncio, then back at Spectre. The fire in his eyes died out, replaced by a dull, gray defeat. He dropped the Mauser into the grass and turned away, walking toward the inner chambers of the embassy like a ghost. Spectre turned his attention to Ramon. He walked over and stood over the aluminum case. "And you, Vasquez," Spectre said, "you've been a very difficult variable to solve." "The truth is in this box, Spectre," Ramon said, his ribs aching with every breath. "The flight logs, the signatures, the proof that your bosses funded the very drugs they're claiming to fight." Spectre knelt down and looked at the diplomatic seal. He didn't try to open it. "I know," Spectre whispered, so low the nuncio couldn't hear. "I was on those flights in '84, Ramon. I provided the security for the meetings in Costa Rica. Do you think I like this? Do you think I want to protect the men who sent me to bleed in this humidity?" Ramon froze. "Then let me take it. Let the world see." Spectre looked at the gates where the 82nd Airborne was waiting. Then he looked back at Ramon. "If this book comes out, the government falls. And when governments fall, they don't fall on the people in D.C. They fall on people like you, and your family in Cullen, and the millions of people who need the illusion of order to survive the night." Spectre stood up. He reached into his belt and pulled out a small, high-intensity thermite grenade. "I have a choice, Ramon. I can take this case back to the unit, where it will be buried in a vault for 100 years, or I can destroy it here and tell them it was lost in the fire at El Chorrillo." "And what happens to me?" Ramon asked. "You died in the cafe, Ramon," Spectre said, his expression unreadable. "A body was found, identifiable by your dental records, which I've already altered. You have a passport in the side pocket of my vest. It says you're a Costa Rican fruit exporter named Jorge. There's a boat waiting at the back pier of the canal." Ramon looked at the case. The truth that could burn the world, or a second chance at life. "Why?" Ramon asked. "Because the silent professionals don't just kill, Ramon. Sometimes we preserve the silence, and sometimes we remember who the real enemies are." Spectre pulled the pin. He didn't throw the grenade. He placed it carefully on top of the aluminum briefcase. "Run, Jorge," Spectre said. "The boat leaves in 10 minutes. Ramon didn't look back. He sprinted through the embassy gardens toward the water. Behind him, a blinding, white-hot flare erupted, a miniature sun that melted aluminum, leather, and film into a single, unrecognizable lump of slag. The Panama Paradox was gone. General Noriega surrendered on January 3, 1990. He was flown to Florida, tried, and imprisoned. The music stopped, the tanks rolled back to their bases, and the jungle began to reclaim the ruins of El Chorrillo. The public was told the invasion was a success, a victory for democracy, a blow to the drug trade. In a small coastal town in Costa Rica, an old man named Jorge sits on his porch every evening, watching the sunset over the Pacific. He doesn't have any photos from his past. He doesn't have any luggage. But sometimes, when the wind blows from the south, he thinks he can hear the ghost of a Guns N' Roses song and the smell of burning film. History is written by the winners. But the truth is what the losers carry in their hearts until they turn to dust.